Forget what you think you know about rebels. Forget starving peasants with pitchforks. This story begins with a princess. Her name was Trung, and she wasn't hiding in a swamp. She was parading on the back of a war elephant, its skin like cracked leather beneath her silk-clad legs. The humid air of the Red River Delta, thick with the scent of jasmine and river mud, was her air. The bronze drums of her people, the Lac Viet, beat a rhythm in her bones that was thousands of years old. This land wasn't a province of the distant Han Empire. It was her family's garden. Her father was a Lac Lord, a chieftain with a bloodline stretching back to the dawn of memory. They weren't just landowners, they were the living history of their people. They were taught to ride before they could properly walk, to wield the sword with the same grace they used a calligraphy brush. Trock had a fire in her eyes, a strategist's mind that saw the flow of rivers and men like a game board. Her younger sister, Trung Yi, was the storm to her calm. Ni's laughter was a thunderclap, and her temper was a flash flood. Together, they were the daughters of a proud, ancient world. And Trock was in love. His name was Thi-Sak, another blue-blooded son of a Lac Lord. He was everything the Han overlords were not. He didn't bow, he didn't scrape. He saw the ever-increasing taxes, the forced assimilation, the Han magistrates replacing their elders, and his jaw would tighten. He spoke of defiance in whispers, of a day when the dragon of the Viet would rise against the eagle of the Han. When he looked at Trock, he didn't just see a woman. He saw a partner, a queen. Their union wasn't just a marriage. It was a burgeoning alliance, a silent promise of vengeance against the slow-creeping poison. That poison had a name, Su Ding. The Han governor wasn't a warrior. He was worse. He was a bureaucrat with a soul of ink and parchment, a man who saw culture as a weed to be uprooted. He sat in his fortified capital of Louis Lao, a stone and timber cancer on the heart of their land, and counted coins. He outlawed their drums. He forced them to adopt Han hairstyles, Han clothing, Han laws that treated women like property. To a man like Su Ding, the Trung sisters, educated, powerful women, defiant women, were an aberration. And Thi-Sak, their charismatic bullhorn, was a threat that had to be silenced. Su Ding didn't send soldiers at first. He sent whispers, rumors, threats disguised as administrative notices. He wanted to break Thi-Sak's spirit, to humiliate him into compliance. A captured Han official's letter, smuggled out of Louis Lao, said it all. These Lac nobles think their blood makes them special. We will remind them that all blood spills the same color. The sisters knew the game. They saw the net closing. Thi-Sak, however, blinded by pride, refused to run, refused to hide. To bend the knee is to break the soul, he told Trock one night, his hand on her swollen belly. She was pregnant with their child, a new generation of their line, a future. But Su Ding wasn't interested in their future. He was interested in his. He needed a lesson, an example. He needed fear, and he knew exactly how to plant it. What happens when you corner a tigress and threaten her cubs? The lesson came on a market day. The air smelled of fish sauce, overripe jackfruit, and damp earth. Thi-Sak was meeting with other Lac lords, his voice a low rumble of dissent amidst the market's chatter. Su Din's soldiers didn't storm in. They seeped out of the alleyways like sewer water. Cold iron, expressionless faces. There was no trial. They dragged Thi-Sak to the center of the market square. The crowd fell silent, The air sucked from 1,000 lungs at once. Trung, hearing the commotion, pushed her way to the front. She saw him, on his knees, his head forced down onto a butcher's block slick with the blood of pigs. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In his, she saw no fear, only love and a silent command. Remember. The axe fell. The sound was a wet thud, a sound that cleaved the world in two, before and after. A scream tore from Track's throat, a sound so raw, so inhuman, it made the soldiers flinch. She fell to her knees in the mud and blood, the life inside her clenching into a knot of ice. Her child, their future, was gone, lost in the same heartbeat as its father. Grief wasn't a feeling, it was a fuel. She stood over her husband's body, her white silk dress now stained a gruesome, blooming red. She didn't weep. Her eyes were black pits of frozen fire. Trung was there, a shield at her side, her hand gripping the hilt of a short sword, her knuckles white. The people watched, terrified, waiting for the sisters to be cut down next. But Su Ding had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought killing the man would kill the rebellion. He didn't understand. He hadn't killed a man. He had created a martyr. And he had unleashed something far more dangerous than a lord's ambition. He had unleashed a woman's vengeance. That night, Track did not sleep. She cut her long hair, a ritual of mourning and a vow of war. She took the blood-soaked sash from her dress and wrapped it around her forehead like a crown. She stood before the ancestral altar of her home, the air thick with incense and sorrow. "They have taken my husband," she declared to the shadows, knee at her side. "They have taken my child. They have taken our future. Now we will take everything from them." The sisters rode out, not as princesses, but as furies. They went from village to village, from longhouse to fishing camp. They didn't give speeches about patriotism or freedom. They did something far more powerful. Track would stand before the gathered people, silent. Me would unroll a banner, the simple, blood-drenched cloth from Thisach's execution. And Track would tell the story. She spoke of the thud of the axe. She spoke of the baby she lost. She weaponized her grief, turning her personal agony into a collective call to arms. A farmer, his hands calloused from a lifetime of toil, laid his only hunting spear at her feet. "My son was taken for the Han army," he wept. "Let me fight for you." A wiry fisherwoman with eyes like chips of obsidian offered her daughters, both trained with the net and the knife. "The Han magistrate took our boat," she spat. "We will take their lives." They gathered an army of ghosts, an army of the dispossessed, the humiliated, the grieving, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. They were an army held together not by discipline, but by shared pain. Their numbers swelled, 10,000, 30,000, 50,000. They forged weapons from farming tools. They communicated with the thunder of the old drums, the very sound Su Ding had tried to ban. Their first target was a small Han outpost on the river. The soldiers inside laughed, a woman leading an army of peasants. But they didn't know what was coming.
At dusk, the drums started, a low, predatory rhythm that vibrated in their bones. Then, from the jungle, a sound rose. It wasn't a war cry. It was a wail. Thousands of voices joined in a single keening lament for all they had lost. The sound was terrifying. The grief of an entire people turned into a psychological weapon. When the attack came, it was led by two women on elephants, Track at the head, her husband's blood-soaked sash, a terrifying banner. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like a flood, a force of nature that could not be reasoned with. They overran the fort in minutes. They took fort after fort. 65 citadels fell, one after another. The Han administration crumbled. Su Ding, barricaded in his capital, heard the news of the approaching storm. He heard of the two demon queens leading an army that couldn't be stopped because it was already dead inside. Trung Track stood on a hill overlooking Luai, the heart of Han power. The city's stone walls seemed impenetrable. Below her, her army of farmers and widows looked tired, hungry, but their eyes burned with a fire she had ignited. They were ready to die for her vengeance. She looked at the stone walls, then at her army of ghosts, and realized victory tasted like ash.
The siege of Louis Lao was a stalemate. Su Ding had thick walls, professional soldiers, and enough grain to last a year. Track's army had passion, but passion doesn't break stone. For weeks, they bled against the walls. The initial fire of their rage was cooling into the grim reality of siege warfare. Her commanders urged a full frontal assault, a wave of bodies to overwhelm the defenders. It would be a slaughter. Her people, her ghosts. Yi, ever the storm, agreed. We burn them out. We make them pay in blood for the blood they have taken. But Track, the strategist, saw a different path, a colder one. She had studied her enemy. She knew the Han soldiers inside weren't local levies. They were men from the north, thousands of miles from their homes. They were lonely. They were homesick. They were loyal to their pay, not to the corrupt governor hiding behind them. She devised a plan, a ruthless gambit that had nothing to do with swords or spears. One moonless night, under the cover of darkness, her forces didn't attack the walls. They crept close, carrying not ladders, but something far more potent. They brought the captured wives and children of the Han administrators and lower-ranking officers. They didn't harm them. They didn't threaten them. They positioned them in the darkness, just beyond the range of archers, and gave them an order. Sing. At first, it was a few hesitant voices. Then more joined. They sang the lullabies of their northern homes, simple, haunting melodies of the Yellow River, of plum blossoms in the spring, of mothers rocking their babies to sleep. The songs drifted over the stone walls, carried on the night breeze. Inside the fortress, the Han soldiers froze. They heard the tunes of their childhood. They heard their own language sung not as a battle cry, but as a tender memory. It was a sound more devastating than any siege engine.
It cracked their discipline. It broke their morale. A grizzled sergeant, a veteran of a dozen border wars, leaned against the stone parapet and wept. He thought of his own son, a boy he hadn't seen in 3 years. Who was he fighting for? This greedy governor who hid while they died, or the memory of a home he might never see again? The psychological attack was merciless. Trock twisted the knife. She had her own people sing their Lac Viet folk songs in reply, creating a chorus of sorrow that echoed across the no man's land, a dialogue of loss. It was no longer a battle between armies. It was a conversation between broken hearts. The next morning, the main gate of Louis Lao creaked open from the inside. The Han soldiers had mutinied. They threw Su Ding bound and gagged at the feet of the Trung sisters. The governor, who commanded with the stroke of a pen, now groveled in the dirt. He looked up at Trock, his face a mask of terror. He saw no mercy in her eyes, only the cold, dead light of a star that had burned out. The victory was absolute. The people poured into the streets, chanting the sisters' names. They swept through the citadel, tearing down the symbols of Han oppression. In the main square, the Lac Viet lords gathered. They approached the two sisters who stood splattered with the mud and grime of the siege, and they knelt, all of them. They proclaimed Trung Troc queen and Trung Yi her co-ruler. The coronation was a blur of bronze drums, waving banners, and the roar of a freed people. Troc stood on the highest tower of the citadel, looking out over her kingdom. The Red River glittered under the sun. Her land, her people, her victory. She had done it. She had avenged the Sac. Her vengeance was complete. But as the cheers rose up to meet her, a chilling thought settled in her heart. She hadn't just used her people's grief to fuel a war. She had used the enemy's own humanity against them. She had turned lullabies into weapons, memories into poison. To save her people, she had become a master of the very cruelty she sought to destroy. She fought to remember her husband, but now she'd forever be remembered for this. They knelt and called her queen. She knew she'd become a monster. The emperor in Chang'an was not pleased. News of a backwater province conquered by 2 barbarian women was more than an embarrassment. It was an existential threat. If one province could break away, others might follow. The Han Empire did not tolerate loose threads. So, he sent the best. His name was Ma Yuan. They didn't call him a general. They called him a force of nature, the wave-calming general, a living legend who had crushed rebellions from the northern steppes to the southern jungles. He wasn't a corrupt bureaucrat like Su Ding. He was a methodical, brilliant, and utterly ruthless instrument of imperial power. He assembled a massive professional army, a legion of hardened veterans equipped with the best iron and steel the world had to offer. He didn't march. He ground his way south, building roads, securing supply lines, and crushing any hint of dissent in his path. For 3 years, the queens had ruled. They abolished the hated Han taxes. They restored the old Lekvite traditions. It was a brief, golden autumn, but they knew winter was coming. Truck, now a ruler weighed down by the ghosts of her decisions, tried to build a state, a defense. Ni, ever the warrior, trained their army, her voice hoarse from shouting commands. The sisters, once inseparable, now argued. We must use the swamps, the jungle, Truck insisted. Guerrilla tactics, bleed them dry. No, Ni countered, we meet them in the open field. We are a kingdom now, not a band of rebels. We show them our strength. In the end, pride won over strategy. Their vengeance had made them queens, but it had also made them proud. Ma Yuan's army was a terrifying sight, a river of steel and discipline flowing into the delta. His scouts were everywhere, his tactics flawless. He avoided the ambushes, lured the sisters' smaller forces into traps, and exploited their army's lack of formal training. One of Truck's own commanders, a lack lord fearful of the Han war machine, betrayed them, giving Ma Yuan maps of their defenses. The betrayal cut deeper than any sword. The final battle was a disaster. It was fought in an open plain, where the sisters' war elephants, so terrifying against disorganized garrisons, became giant targets for Ma Yuan's disciplined crossbowmen. They fired volley after volley of flaming arrows. The terrified beasts panicked, stampeding back through the Viet lines, trampling their own soldiers. It was a slaughter. A young soldier, no older than 15, fighting for his queens, wrote a final letter to his mother the night before the battle. It was later found tucked inside his tunic. It read, "I am not afraid to die, but I fear I will not remember the taste of your fish soup. Tell my sister I am sorry I broke her favorite doll." They forced the sisters to retreat, their army shattered, their dream turning to nightmare. They fell back again and again, fighting with a desperate courage that stunned even the Han veterans. But courage could not stop the tide. They were finally cornered, their last loyal warriors forming a circle around them on the bank of the Hat River. The water flowed behind them, deep and fast. Before them, the closing ranks of Ma Yuan's legions. There was no escape. Ma Yuan offered them a choice: surrender. They would be taken to the capital in chains, paraded through the streets as a symbol of the empire's power, and then executed. Their names would become a curse, a lesson in futility. Truck looked at Ni. The fire in her sister's eyes was not fear, but defiance. They had lived as Lekvite. They would die as Lekvite. They would not be a trophy for any emperor. Their story would not end in a cage. They took each other's hand. They remembered the feel of an elephant's hide, the smell of jasmine, the sound of their father's laughter, the sight of Tishak's smile. They remembered who they were. They turned their backs on the enemy and walked into the river. The current took them, their silk robes swirling around them, a final defiant banner before they disappeared beneath the waves. They denied the empire its victory. Ma Yuan stood on the riverbank, victorious but cheated. He would go on to consolidate Han rule, erecting bronze pillars to mark the new southern border of the empire, a permanent scar on the land. He thought he had erased them. He was wrong. They ruled for 3 years. They were remembered for 2,000.
The Trung sisters didn't just fight an empire, they built a legend.